solves is called the visibility gap. The visibility gap is really organizations' inability to empirically understand the end-user experience and to proactively manage that end-user experience. And the reason that we have the visibility gap is that most organizations, and really most vendors within the performance monitoring space, have been focused on the data center performance and availability tier, which is put here within the orange section. And this is really the instrumentations of our web servers, app servers, databases, back-end mainframes, and middleware tiers like TIBCO and MQ, which are all very important and critical to monitor. But all those technologies have one, fall short in one area, and that's really giving visibility to the end user, because their vantage point of the end user is really from the data center looking outwards towards that end user. And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to understand what's happening at a user's device by having a data center-centric view. So what we see in a lot of the organizations that we deal with prior to Eternity is that end users have two typical problems. One is they either live with poor performance. So after the fact, we hear that performance is bad, and then we're in a reactive mode to understand why that performance was bad. Or we have users that complain about performance in real time. Right? So they give us very valuable information like, my desktop or the application is slow. And then it's up to us to determine what slow means to that end user. Is slow 25 seconds to submit a voucher? Is it 45 seconds to look up a customer? How do we determine what slow is to that end user? And more importantly, how do we know if that slowness is isolated to that single user or if it's more widespread throughout the organization? How do we understand the magnitude of impact? And really, Eternity's mission is to close that visibility gap with our platform for real end-user experience. And when we talk about end-user experience, we really define that by three streams of data that make up what that end-user experience is. The first is the actual application performance. And when we talk about application performance, we're really talking about the key to glass of those applications. So not when the request was sent from the back end, where typically it could be sub-second, but actually when the screen's rendered and the user can interact with that screen. That's a huge differentiator of Eternity I'm going to get into in a little bit more detail. The second piece we look at is the device health itself and how that impacts performance from an end user's perspective. When we talk about a device, we're talking about a real desktop, a virtual desktop, or a mobile device. And then the third piece of the puzzle is the actual user behavior and productivity. So how does the user interact with the application? That's going to be part of the portrait that we put together in terms of defining that real end user experience. So at the end of the day, what the value that Eternity provides is the ability to transform that endpoint where that device, whether that's a physical, virtual, or mobile device, into a self-monitoring platform that users experience everywhere. So really where Eternity is focused is in this purple section. And in the orange section is typically where you're going to find organizations like CA, DEC, IBM, which we will complement. And really the combination of Eternity with what you've invested with on the back end really provides that true holy grail, true end-to-end management, literally from the device all the way through the back end. So let's delve down a little bit deeper in terms of those components that make up the end-user experience. As I mentioned before, when we talk about application coverage, when we talk about being able to do any application, we really mean it. So Eternity can support virtually any application, whether it's a rich internet application built in Ajax, whether it's a thick client application, whether it's web-based, whether it's an off-the-shelf application like Outlook or Lotus Notes, whether it's a virtualized application, whether that's Citrix and ICA or VMware through PCA over IP, or a mobile application, whether that mobile application is virtualized or that's a mobile application that you're building and publishing to your own store for your customers. Eternity can bring all of those applications under management, which is extremely powerful, a true enterprise solution from that end. The second big piece is all around the device itself, and in terms of our ability to monitor that device. Because even if the application is performing well, if the platform it's on is sluggish due to CPU, I/O, network utilization, or a third-party plugin like a Symantec or a McAfee, that user's experience with the application will be poor. So we can see things like a hung process, a crashed application, a blue screen of death, even a pop-up. We also have the ability to monitor and provide root cause analysis around how long it takes a machine to boot up and how long it takes a user to log on to their PC, which is extremely interesting and valuable. So really the ability to correlate application transactional performance with device resource consumption is a key differentiator of our technology. We then take that information that defines the end user, and we put that into our platforms. And the name of our solution is called Frontline Performance Intelligence. And that's really the analysis and correlation of that information into real-time, right-time business intelligence. So as Ryan goes through the demonstration, what you'll see is Eternity is the fusion of two core concepts, right? First, it's a user-centric proactive monitor, but it's also a very robust analytics engine that's going to allow you to do things like capacity planning, trending, quality of service analysis, and service management. And that's all driven from the notion of autonomic performance profiles. So for every application that we put under management, whether it's SAP or Microsoft Outlook, we create a baseline of what is normal performance. That baseline is broken down by the individual transactions within that application, the type of desktop that a user is accessing that application, whether it's physical or virtual, the type of OS they're on, whether it's Windows XP or Windows 7, the target server that they're executing those transactions against, the locations of those users, and as things deviate from those baselines, that's what we're going to use in terms of providing proactive alerting in terms of performance degradations. But you'll also use those baselines to compare performance. So why does Boston have better performance than New York? And what separates the Boston office from the New York office? What are the performance outcomes in terms of those two sites? We also provide the ability that you can set your own manual thresholds. So in addition to the self-learned baseline, if you had a certain SLO or KPI with a line of business that said regardless of where this user was or what type of desktop they were on, if this transaction takes more than 6 seconds, I want to be notified of that transaction. You can do that as well. So you really have the best of both worlds. You have a self-learned baseline that is dynamic and all automatic through Eternity's platform, as well as the ability to overlay that with manual thresholds so nothing falls into the cracks. In terms of our architecture is a service-oriented architecture. It's comprised of 4 services. The first service being the data collection, and those are the agents that we deploy. Agents get deployed on both physical and virtual desktops. The agent is a standard MSI, so how you deploy your software today is how you would deploy our agent. On average, that agent takes 0.2% CPU utilization, and that's really where the secret sauce is. There's no impact to the user, to the desktop, or the application itself. That agent reports into a management service every minute. That management service runs on the Windows platform. That can be a physical or a virtual machine. As part of the management service is our analytics service. That's our database. Our database is an Oracle Enterprise database. It's OEM to Eternity. It's turnkey to you. There's nothing that you need to do from a licensing or support perspective. And then in between the management service and those agents that collect data is something called an aggregation service, which acts as a data collector or a bidirectional communication between what you're defining within your management service and those agents that are collecting data. But the aggregation service also allows us to scale our solution in a horizontal and high availability way. Each aggregation service can house around 5,000 endpoints. So in this simplistic diagram, we're looking at a deployment of around 15,000 endpoints. Those aggregation services can be deployed geographically or centrally within a data center. And a single instance of the management service can scale to support tens of thousands of endpoints. So a single management service can actually support up to 85,000 endpoints on a single instance, with plans to go to over 100,000 endpoints later in 2013. So why are organizations adopting Eternity, and why is our growth so exponential over the last several years? Customers really derive value from Eternity in kind of 3 broad use cases. The first being the what use case, or the visibility. So really the elimination of manually monitoring and empirically understanding what that user experience is by location, by application, by transaction, down to the device of the individual user. The second use case is what we call the why use case, and that's all around problem isolation and cause analysis. And this is really the ability to not only identify that users are suffering or having poor performance, but understand why they're having poor performance, which is going to dramatically reduce business disruption and reduce mean time to repair. And this is also what will tie into some of those investments on the back end, whether you're using C or PUC. The third use case is all around informed capacity planning, or the what-if use case. So since we live on the endpoint, whether that's a physical endpoint or virtual endpoint or a mobile endpoint, we can provide some very interesting empirical data in terms of what's happening within your environment. So for instance, if you're moving from a physical environment to a virtual environment, Eternity can actually compare, measure, and monitor the difference between the delivery of the application within the physical environment as well as the virtual environment. And this is very critical and why global outsourcers like Dell, Wipro, and Unisys have all adopted Eternity, because Eternity is really the only solution on the marketplace that actually could do that comparison at the individual transaction level within an application. And the same would apply if you were moving from a Windows XP environment to a Windows 7 environment. So really having that empirical data will ensure a strong return on investment in terms of infrastructure changes that you're making, even changes that are happening in the back end in the core section that we're not monitoring if you're doing a SAN or a WAN or some type of accelerator improvement within the data center. We'll always see the end result of that from the user's point of view. So did that change actually make a difference? Is that a good bang for our buck? So as Ryan goes through the demo, he's going to walk you through all three of these use cases: the visibility use case, the troubleshooting use case, as well as the what if or the capacity use case. Ryan?